Okay, everyone, we're going to move on with our next speaker. You know, I may not be doing what I'm doing today if it weren't for Bob Tuskin. Bob helped me break into internet radio and really helped me along in the early stages of that process. I consider Bob to be one of the main voices in the new independent media that is telling the truth. And when I, backed away from being the main organizer of the Free Your Mind conference after kind of, founding this entire project, I was kind of worried about whose hands the effort would go into because there's so much involved and there's so much time and dedication and effort involved in hosting something like this. But one thing I could say for sure is that Free Your Mind is in good hands. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the main organizers of the Free Your Mind 3 conference, Bob Tuskin.
The title of my talk is Scarcity-Based Mind Control and the Liberation of the Mind, Body, and Spirit. This is something that I feel is at the essence of the control structure. We've seen a lot of different forms of mind control, but something that I feel has not been exposed to the fullest extent is the use of scarcity and inversely, abundance. So whenever I talk on my radio show or as an activist or as a father or whatever capacity I might be in, I like to look at the root of the problem and, of course, look at what's the solution. And it's very important for me to have that dialect, to have not the problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialect, but to be aware of the fact that we do have to identify the root of the problem, not symptomatic things that get us caught up spinning in a wheel, but the root of the problem, and then focus on the solution. And what I'm going to try to relay for this talk is that scarcity is at the root of so many problems. First, let's define what is scarcity. Scarcity is simply the state of being scarce or in short supply. Now, many of times we think of scarcity as having to do with something material. However, scarcity can apply to many different aspects of our lives. It can apply to a scarcity of a certain emotion or a scarcity of a certain feeling, a scarcity of some sort of entity, of some sort of institution. And I'm thinking of one institution right off the bat that I would like some scarcity of. So this comes to the question, can scarcity manipulate our behaviors? Because that's ultimately what we're getting at here. Is taking a look at how the powers that shouldn't be utilize scarcity to both control the useless eaters and how the powers that shouldn't be equally are controlled by scarcity themselves. Because they ultimately are victims of the same scarcity-based mind control that has been passed along to them, imprinted in their brains, generation after generation after generation. And this is a big part of the power structure today. Can scarcity control human behavior? Well, you ever hear Black Friday? That certainly controls human behavior. And that's all about this consumer scarcity, the scarcity of having enough Federal Reserve notes that run one time a year. They might run out of that flat screen television. So let's trample over each other like animals. Sounds like a plan? I mean, it's insane, absolutely insane. But the best example I like to give of the way in which scarcity can manipulate behavior is a test that was done with chickens. So there were chickens, and they were given an abundance of food and water. Whenever they were hungry, they'd go to the feeder, and there would always be complete abundance of food and water, the basic necessities. They had shelter, they had abundant food and water, and they were good to go. Well, what happened was somebody realized that if they tweaked that constant abundance and introduced scarcity to these chickens, their behavior started to change. When they took the food away, they started to get more greedy. They started to hoard. They started to fight amongst one another. The pecking order was developed. When the abundance was reintroduced, they continued this greed. They continued hoarding, and so on and so forth. And I feel that although we're not chickens, don't get me wrong, but it's pretty darn clear to me that we are manipulated by that same scarcity-based mentality. And the powers that shouldn't be, which I'll refer to throughout this talk today, are doing just that. They're putting those Federal Reserve notes out. They're putting that resource out. They're removing that resource. And it's not just resources. It's a number of different conditioning. It's a number of different pieces of media and so on and so forth. And we are being manipulated a lot like these chickens were in the experiment. So let's break down scarcity on one side and abundance on the other. Scarcity, uncertainty of survival. Not being sure if you're going to survive. Being in a mentality of competition. Abundance, on the other hand, is inherent access to the necessity of life. Collaboration, not competition. Do you see the dichotomy here? Desperation, not confidence. Desperation, a lack of confidence. Confidence in abundance-based initiative. Mistrust, trust. If you have mistrust, you have a scarcity of trust. Misery, prosperity. Hoarding, like the chickens. Sharing. Blame, responsibility. War, peace. Death and life. And this is the dichotomy that I'm trying to break down for you guys, that I'm going to try to show you. This scarcity mentality, this scarcity manipulation versus the mentality of abundance and the beauty of abundance. And if we take a look at Mark Passio's natural law expressions, which many of you are students of, we see the same sort of dichotomy. Love as a positive expression, an abundance of heart, an abundance of caring. On the other side, fear, the lack of love. And fear ultimately, which I'll get into in just a moment, is a major scarcity-based mind control tool. Fear, trauma, and everything else. Knowledge, an abundance of wisdom. Inversely, ignorance, the lack thereof. Ignorance is bliss, though, I guess they say. Anybody have a glass of fluoride I can drink right now? Sovereignty. Sovereignty. The internal monarchy. And on the other side, confusion. Freedom. Freedom. When we are free, we have abundant possibilities. There is no restriction. There is no control in the negative side of things. Control, scarcity. Order of good, chaos of evil. So that brings up the question about human nature. And I want to break that down for a moment because we've been told by many people that human nature is to be greedy and that this is the human condition and so on and so forth. My argument is that is not the case. In fact, one of the people that's quoted most often when we hear about human nature is a guy by the name of Charles Darwin. You might have heard of him. Everybody talks about his notion of survival of the fittest, right? You've all heard that. And when you actually look at Darwin's work, it's kind of interesting because the term survival of the fittest was only mentioned maybe a half a dozen times, if that, in his body of work. And he actually spoke of, which is interesting to me, the fact that humanity should be custodians of the earth, that we have something that is beyond the primitive nature of animals, and that we should act accordingly. But the social Darwinists, the eugenicists, the hijackers of Darwinism, if you will, have taken that and perverted that. And they want you to think human nature is that you are bound to be a slave or a slave master. Folks, we're neither. We're neither. Human behavior, on the other hand, is what we're really referring to. Our behaviors are being manipulated. We are being perverted and controlled from many different means, but for the sake of this talk, through scarcity. And I want to quote Peter Joseph for a moment. This is a little wordy, so I'll just run through this. Our entire system is an economic sense, or in an economic sense rather, is based on restriction. Scarcity and inefficiency are the movers of money, which we'll get to. The more there is of any resource, the less you can charge for it. Basic law of supply and demand, scarcity-based economics. The more problems there are, the more opportunities there are to make money. This reality is a social disease for people who can actually gain off the misery of others and the destruction of the environment. Efficiency, abundance, and sustainability are enemies of our economic structure, for they are inverse to the mechanics required to perpetuate consumption. That's very powerful, but I want to give a caveat to that. Because Agenda 21 and the sustainability movement, in my eyes, is a wolf in sheep's clothing many of times. So we need to be careful about that. But that doesn't take away from the point that nature is beautiful and there is abundance in nature. And I will go on to show you this. And we do not need to be kept in the same confines. So there's this kind of double-edged sword that we need to be conscious of here. Not fall for false prophets, but at the same time realize what our system is really about and what it really supports and perpetuates. He goes on to say this is profoundly critical to understand. For once you put this together, you begin to see that the 1 billion people currently starving on this planet, the endless slums of the poor, and all the horrors of a culture due to poverty and pravity are not natural phenomena due to some natural human order or lack of earthly resources. They are products of the creation, perpetuation, and preservation of artificial scarcity and inefficiency. A billion people going hungry every day. And I'm going to get to why, and I don't know that I have to do too much convincing here, but that is unnecessary. Since the 1920s, we've had the ability to produce more food than ever before because of technology. And what did they do during the Great Depression while people were waiting in food lines for soup and bread? They poured milk down the drain, they burned crops, they told farmers not to grow food for Federal Reserve notes, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, 1 billion people are hungry. It's because our monetary system is based entirely on scarcity. And we have reached the point where it is time for an evolution of this paradigm that we have been stuck in for thousands of years. Ultimately, that is a tough transition that we're going to have to make. And we're going to have a lot of talks about what that next step is. But I tell you, it is not found in scarcity. It is found in abundance. I'll get back to some of that in just a moment. But first, I want to relate to you that scarcity, going back to what I said earlier, is very much about the mind as well and not just the resources we do have or do not have. One of the biggest scarcity-based mind control events in my lifetime was 9/11. What do I mean by that? The trauma and the fear, the idea that you are not safe, that you are scarcely safe, that your safety is in threat, is at threat rather, and that you got to be careful because if you, at any given time, walk down the street, you might get blown up by a terrorist. That's the scarcity manipulation, the fear manipulation of the scarcity of your safety, of your lifespan, of your family, of your friends, the sanctity of the world as you know it, and so on and so forth. So because your life is scarce and we need to protect you, let's go kill 1 million people and so on and so forth. What do you say? Yeah, right? And that has a lot to do with trauma. Trauma and scarcity go hand in hand. I do want to give another caveat here because I believe fear on a different level is an appropriate feeling. I don't believe the New Age bullshit, Mark Passio, thank you very much, that says just think positively and everything's going to be okay. Don't fear anything. Everything's going to be all right. That scarcity is there for a reason. If a bear comes at you in the woods and is going to maul you to death, you don't say, "Come here, bear, it's okay." You don't stand there. You stand up and you take that bear down. So that fear has an appropriate place. It really does. And I think we need to realize that and not be too Pollyannish with our thinking. It's a balance, mind you, but I think we really should realize that it has its place at times. All right, so let's talk about the biggest scarcity-based control factor, money. A belief-based system of control built upon the fear of scarcity, which is purposefully designed to limit access to energy. This is another definition from Mark Passio that I felt was very well put. I've heard a lot of definitions of money. We can break down the meaning of money. We could talk about the economic models, and we can go all the way back to when sticks were used, and then we had gold and all these different things. But ultimately, money is an extension of scarcity. Barter and money are synonymous, actually. Because bartering is still based on the fact that I only have so many apples. My apples are scarce. So your tomatoes are in more abundance. I'll give you fewer apples for more tomatoes. How's that sound? That's the basic principle of scarcity-based economics. And unfortunately, that model doesn't work. Peter Coyote, I think he's an actor maybe. I found this quote when I was searching, and I think this is great, a great, very blunt way of putting it. Money is a way of creating scarcity. And I'll add an extension to that. Money is a way of maintaining scarcity, and money is scarcity. That's the very essence of money. And I'm not just talking about the fractional reserve banking, the debt-based system, which is the current incarnation of money. I'm talking about going back for thousands of years, scarcity-based mind control through the manifestation of one of the things we take for granted the most, not us, but in general, people take for granted the most, which is money. Nobody ever sits down and says, what really is money? They don't think about that. Everyone here does, but the point being, I always felt like that's kind of an important thing to wrap your head around. And they want to give you this mammy-pammy definition of what money is or isn't, but ultimately it is a simple concept. We have economists writing books and people who are really smart idiots telling us about economic models and everything else, and it's all bullshit. Does anybody know who this guy is by chance? He's a eugenicist. You might be familiar with him. He's got a great quote. Bill Gates says, we've got to put a lot of money into changing behavior. Do you see the double meaning there? That money changes behavior, and we need to continue to flood that mentality. And I believe there was obvious intent with that statement. Thomas Sowell, another guy who I'm iffy about, says the first lesson of economics is scarcity. There is never enough of anything to satisfy all those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. And that's how those two systems operate, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Twain says the lack of money is the root of all evil. The lack of money. Well, money, by its very essence, is lacking. So money, again, is a big part of what he might call evil, but what I call scarcity-based mind control. I want to talk about the Milgram experiment for a moment. You guys know about the Milgram experiment? A lot of people do. The Milgram experiment touched on a form of scarcity mind control that I think is quite compelling. And this is a form of an appeal to authority. So for those at home who are keeping score who don't know the Milgram Project, we had two individuals that volunteered for an experiment. One of the individuals was assigned asking questions in a different room, and the other individual was going to answer these questions. And the catch was, the individual answering the questions was going to be hooked up to an electric shock device. And every time that individual answered a question incorrectly, they were going to get an increasing shock to the point where clearly in the other room, it showed the different levels of electricity going all the way to the point of being lethal. And the other person in the other room could hear the other person. They had what do they call that? A radio between the two rooms, right? Yeah, whatever it's called. So they asked the question, and the person, they don't realize this isn't really happening, thank goodness. Who knows? It probably is happening in some CIA dungeon somewhere for real. But at least what we heard about the Milgram experiment is it didn't really happen. But they could hear these people as they inevitably answer questions wrong each time, and they're increasing the voltage. They can hear these people in discomfort to the point where they're unresponsive all of a sudden after intense screaming. And these people, and this is perhaps our brothers, our sisters, these are people, good people. They're just going along, continuing the experiment because they got that white coat in the room saying, do not compromise the experiment. You must continue or the experiment will be compromised. That institution, that idea that scientist knows best, that the doctor knows best, is an appeal to authority fallacy. And it has to do with the fact that if we believe that a doctor has the authority, and this is a little tricky because it's the opposite of scarcity in this case, then they must be correct because they have an abundance of belief behind them. Well, all I know is that even if one person believes something that is true, it is still the truth despite 9 billion people thinking it's not. The truth is the truth. Fuck the authority fallacy. That's all I got to say. Sorry for my language, but this is something that pisses me off. And this is at, I think, many of our hearts, is this distrust of authority, this ability to not just sit there and take it and to believe what we're told, to know that there's more to what's being said than just mindly accepting it. Social proof is a big part of this, and it is simply a contributing factor to the effectiveness of scarcity, because if a product is sold out or inventory is extremely low or something is extremely sought after, scarce, humans interpret that to mean the product must be good since everyone else appears to be buying it. Well, oncology must be good because everybody's getting cancer and getting their radiation, so it must be good. Everyone's buying it with billions of dollars into that industry. There was a academic study that was done about job classifieds, job wanted ads. And they showed that the listings that said that only a few positions were available and that they were hiring just a limited group of people got 10 times the response of the ad that said we need a bunch of people to work for us. Because that idea that, oh, well, if there's only a few people working or a few openings here, this must have some security. It's scarce. This must be the way to go. So they're funneling people who are falling in that trap. And we need to identify these mental traps because they are found in many different capacities. Marketing is the big one, and it's a simple, straightforward notion that scarcity creates demand. By the way, this talk right here will be available for limited time only. Get copies while it lasts, okay? Just so you know. Yeah, we're running out of time for the conference. Make sure all your Federal Reserve notes go for the next one because we might not be here tomorrow. You never know. How many times have you guys heard that marketing? We're bombarded with it constantly. It's insane. Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda, later changed to PR because, propaganda's got a negative connotation associated with it. Public relations sounds a lot nicer. What do you think, right? Let's call it public relations. Well, he realized that we needed to pervert people's wants and desires to go beyond that of just their basic necessities. People used to buy a jacket because it kept them warm, not because Lady Gaga endorsed it with human blood on it or whatever crazy stuff they got going on. But that's been completely perverted. That's been completely changed. Again, that has to do with scarcity. A limited edition dress. Only so many people can go to the Gap to buy this outfit. Therefore, it must be a nicer outfit. You look at a car, okay? A car, for instance. Really, at the end of the day, there's not much of a difference between the BMW and the other car to a certain extent. I know this is counterintuitive because we still see these cars. Even I, when I say that, think that, wait, Bob, the BMW is a lot more comfortable and it's a lot nicer. Well, really, the other car could be made the same way, but there's that scarcity of the BMW and Mercedes, so our minds think, wow, that's sexy. That's the way to go. Diamonds, gold, that's exactly what I was going to get at. Somebody said, what about diamonds? Exactly right. Gold has no value. It has value for the Federal Reserve System. It has value. It will get you things. You can trade in your ounce of gold for $1,000+. That's not what I'm saying. Gold has a perceived value that is based on nothing. Silver, the same way, but at least silver has some practical uses that we can use for technology and things of real importance. You're on an island with gold everywhere you look. The streets are made of gold, but you're hungry. You're real hungry. Have fun eating that gold, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to go hungry. You're going to be real hungry if you want to give gold value that's not there. It has no value, and this has been a major control function of the powers that shouldn't be. They love gold. They have an obsession with gold for thousands of years. The gold rush and everything else has consumed people. Diamonds, I could get into a tangent on that. It's the same sort of paradigm there. But ultimately, gold doesn't have to be scarce anymore. Here's why. There is newfound technology that can extract, using the minerals in ocean seawater, using a square mile of ocean seawater, we can extract more gold from the ocean than has ever been harvested from the ground in the planet Earth's history. You might say, well, Bob, why don't they do that then? That sounds awesome. Why haven't I heard about this? An appeal to belief fallacy. But the bottom line is, well, the reason is, A, it's more expensive to extract gold that way. It costs about $600 an ounce. And it only costs about $300 an ounce to get it from the ground. But if we were to liberate that much gold from the ocean, what value would it have? If the streets were paved with gold, if we were breathing gold, it would basically completely topple the system. So our system is about scarcity, and it's about maintaining scarcity at any cost. And planned obsolescence is a way in which this works. I mentioned milk being poured down the drain and fields being burnt and farmers being paid to not grow crops. Well, technology, light bulbs used to work. They used to last a lot longer while they came together in a meeting hall like the Bilderberg Group or whatever, these folks, and they said, we got to do something about these damn light bulbs. They last too long. What? That's what we want. No, we can't profit off of that now. So they came together and they manipulated the light bulbs. And this is what we have. Welcome to planet Earth, ladies and gentlemen. It's completely pointless. And it's to a detriment not only to our minds, but to the planet Earth. What drives true innovation is abundance and ease, not the pressure of scarcity. That's important. It really is. We will never see the true proliferation of the arts, of qualities that really matter. You know, I'm sure you see stuff all the time, and you're like, this does not really matter. But we've been completely conditioned to not even realize that a good conversation, a lecture like this, or something of artistic value, of spiritual value, which I'm going to get to, that has no importance because we're demanded by the scarcity-based mind control and system. So what really is of importance in our life? Well, I would beg to argue that if we break down the necessities, that's a good starting point. Shelter is the first one. Oftentimes you hear water and food. Shelter's the first one because if you're freezing your ass off, you're going to die. So you need that shelter. Air is very important as well. That's something that people forget. And of course, we are diminishing the quality of our air on a regular basis with all sorts of poisons in our environment. Food and water and so on and so forth. But outside of that, we need camaraderie. Human beings have something that a lot of people forget that is a necessity, and that is the desire to learn and to love. Those are very important. But should we have a desire to fill in the blank, whatever mindless perversion of the basic desires and true nature of human? We shouldn't have a desire to have that front row ticket to Miley Cyrus. We shouldn't have a desire to watch Dancing with the Stars or to trample over each other like animals on Black Friday. These are perversions of our true nature. And this is scarcity talking, not our hearts. And Brene Brown said, for me, the opposite of scarcity is not necessarily abundance, it's enough. I'm enough, my kids are enough. And if you look at my last Free Your Mind conference lecture, rather, my son is enough. I really get that now that I'm a new parent. And I see that ultimately, as a child, we're so innocent and we have that abundance of life ahead of us. The programming has not completely been put on our laps, and slowly but surely the conditioning, the scarcity, the trauma, and everything else starts to weigh on us. And then we become that old curmudgeon, that rickety old man. But that's not an ageist comment. That has nothing to do with age. That has to do with the mindset. Because one of my closest friends, Hart Stringfellow, is 94 years old. And you know what? He has the purest heart of a child of anybody I know. And that is because his abundance goes beyond this physical vessel. His abundance, and this is getting into the spiritual component here, his abundance goes above and beyond this body and so on and so forth. To digress for a moment with the way in which children are kept in that scarcity-based mind control, it's grades. Only you have to get this grade, 90% of the grade. Otherwise, if you only have a 60%, the grade structure is completely scarcity-based mind control. You have to be a part of the cool kids crowd. You have to do this and that. All of these have elements of scarcity associated with them. And here's that beautiful child with the abundance of life ahead of him. And here is that scarcity-based mind control of the elderly gentleman. Again, not an ageist remark, but this individual, I don't know, I don't know this guy for the record. He's probably a nice guy. But anyways, the point being, it does play a toll. Now, on the other hand, Aristotle, of course, talked about, again, we're going to the dichotomy between ignorance and wisdom. And philosophy, if you break down the actual meaning, is a love of wisdom. And Aristotle, one of the world's most noted philosophers, said, it's the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it. In other words, it is an abundance of thinking, not limiting yourself to a box. This agnostic way of thinking is crucial, and it's a very important thing that schooling and the indoctrination camps and everything else in our world today, perpetuating scarcity-based mind control, keeps us away from. The trivium is a very important component of being able to process this abundance of information, because we do have to have some filters. So the classical education, the trivium and quadrivium, is a way in which we can filter this abundance of information, because at the end of the day, overload can be of a detriment to our minds as well. So there's that dichotomy there that's also important to look at. Now let's talk about what happens when shit hits the fan for a moment, okay? True social change occurs inversely with the approach of the stomach to the spine. When people are hungry, when there is this scarcity of stuff that really matters, we are going to see a revolution. Because I am not going to let my son go without eating. Now, luckily, I'm getting prepared. But most people are not. Most people are completely vulnerable. If our electrical grid goes down at any given moment because of an EMP, we're vulnerable. If something happens with our economic system of great proportions, we're vulnerable. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Shit will hit the fan, and I'm getting ready for it. How about you? When you're getting ready for your family to be protected, you have an abundance of protection behind you. You're stocking up. You're getting ready for it through abundance. Because you know that under conditions of scarcity, you will react differently and your behaviors will change. And accordingly, our world will start to continue to get into a Mad Max style world, if you will, if you catch that reference. This is a freaking waste of space and is absolutely insane. This is mind control. A lawn is mind control, ladies and gentlemen. This is scarcity. This is a perpetuation of scarcity, because in order to maintain this lawn, we have to waste water, we have to waste energy, we have to waste human labor, and so on and so forth, when we can have permaculture, feed ourselves, have beauty. I mean, let's do a quick test here to make sure I'm not crazy. You have this or this. What's more beautiful to you? I mean, it's a no-brainer, but we're trained again to think that this scarcity is important, is acceptable. It looks nice to people, but it's an illusion. And once you've prepared, which I spend a lot of time on, and I'm not doing the topic of preparedness any justice by no means in this talk, but I want to put it within the context of scarcity-based mind control, and this is a part of the body. Of course, the solution, thank you, the solution is to find abundance. And in abundance, there is nature. I'm a huge fan of permaculture. I'm a huge fan of seeing that the earth and its ecosystems can provide, that we have more than enough ability to grow food beyond Monsanto's control, beyond monoculture and everything else. But we're being quashed because, as Monsanto says, they are helping us with a growing population. Mind you, population control and the backing behind eugenics has everything to do with scarcity. The idea that we, the useless eaters, need to be brought back to 500 million, praise the Georgia Guidestones, has everything to do with scarcity. One of the things that we have to look at is protecting ourselves, because there is, again, a threat to our abundance and sovereignty. And when shit hits the fan and somebody comes and tries to rob me of my abundance and force the scarcity and steal and violate natural law, there comes a point in time where guns come into play to maintain the protection and sovereignty of us as individuals. Let's talk about the body some more, and let's talk about health for a moment. One of the biggest scarcity-based threats to our health are all of the poisons that we face on a regular basis. And I'm going to go through some of these poisons. Fasten your seatbelts. Fluoride, chlorine, GMOs, radiation, growth hormone, MSG, paraben, smoking, vaccines. In the vaccines, we have mercury, thimerosal, aborted fetal tissue, formaldehyde, aluminum. Let's go to BHT and BHA, a food additive, butane, propyl gallate, sulfites, olestra, artificial colors, red number 40, blue number 1, blue number 2, citrus red number 1, citrus red number 2, green number 3, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, red number 2, red number 3, caramel coloring, brown HT, orange B, Bixin, Norbixin, artificial sweeteners, whether it be saccharin, aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, can't even say that one, sucralose, agave nectar even, bleach starch, BPAs, lead, pesticides, television, I threw that one in there, SSRIs, cell phones and the radiation from the Wi-Fi, from the smart meters, airport scanners, opt out at a few of those, chemotherapy, statin drugs, propaganda, threw that one in there, asbestos, cosmetic phthalates, hairspray, fragrances, they all have them, flame retardants making us retarded, air fresheners, chemicals in carpets, VOCs, mothballs, dryer sheets, but not everything is poison, believe it or not. Oh, I forgot a lot of them, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. And that is perpetuating the scarcity of our health. Health is abundance. Bad health is scarcity. But guess what? I got something really cool to share with you guys. Guess what? Thank you. That was a rhetorical. There's somebody out there that can decide whether or not any of this stuff is a factor in your life. And guess who decides? You do. They want you to think that these slow kill poisons we're bound to. It's like they're pinning you down, pouring the high fructose and aspartame and shooting the vaccines in your arm without your choice. Well, that's coming, by the way. But ultimately, we decide to find the scarcity in our minds, body, and our spirit. And all of these poisons, you ultimately have the choice to avoid. But if you don't avoid them and you want to continue to be a sick individual and you want to live forever, because the powers that shouldn't be the elite, they might have all the money in the world, they might have all the control in the world, because at some point money doesn't really matter. It's about the control and everything else. It's about the power. But you know what they scare the most? You know what they're scared of the most, rather? Dying. Well, they have a solution for that. 2045, Avatar Project milestones, transhumanism. It's not for you guys, don't worry. It's just for the elite. Sorry. But by 2015, it is 2015, we're having a robotic copy of a human body remotely controlled via BCI in 2025. But eventually, they're going to get to a hologram-like avatar. Much of this is probably already in place. What we know about as far as technology is only the tip of the iceberg. Anything we know about the powers that shouldn't be in the endless resources fueling these black holes are far more advanced. But they're afraid, ultimately, of dying. And they are going to die on some level. What they don't know is that there's more to than just dying in this physical body. But if they die in this physical body and you have any spiritual understanding, and I'm not talking about religion, I'll get to that in a moment, they're going to have to face their karmic or spiritual baggage, and they are scared shitless of that. And if we look at scarcity, and I've talked about a lot of different incarnations of scarcity, ultimately time is the scarcity, and it's the commodity we can't create any more of. But what is time? What is time? Another one of those things we take for granted, just like money. Well, time's mind control, because time is all relative. It is not real. It's not 9 to 5 go to your job, slave. That's not time. There's a lot more to it. And I think it's very important we see how time will manipulate people's behaviors. You only have so much to do this. Therefore, you're going to rush. And when you rush, that creates all sorts of errors, perhaps. And so on and so forth. I could go on for some time about time, no pun intended. But I see it as a function of scarcity. And religion, this is the last slide I steal from my colleague Mark Passio, but this is so appropriate. Religion, from the Latin verb religare, to tie back, to hold back, to thwart, from forward progress to bind. What does that sound like? Scarcity. That is religion as we know it in many respects today. A system of control based in unchallenged dogmatic belief which holds back the progress of consciousness that goes beyond this scarcity-based belief, this fear of dropping dead from sin and all these other tools of scarcity-based mind control that religion utilizes. I got to take a deep breath. What do you think so far? Yeah? I'm going to take this home now. All right, we're gonna bottom line this. We're going to put the period there because I only got so much time. I'm running out of time. I used to think when I was a kid, believe it or not, I thought when I was a kid, I used to think about how I could think that I was thinking about how I was thinking about thinking that I'm thinking that I'm thinking about thinking that I'm thinking. And you know what I realized? That's a fractal. You know fractals? Self-similar. Goes on in perpetuity into infinity. The vastness, the abundance of nature, if you will. Because in nature, we see fractals everywhere you look. Most things in nature have some sort of fractal geometry associated with it. Most things in nature. And it's not just the Romanesca broccoli, but it's everything. It's a coastline to a peninsula, and you can zoom out and see all sorts of fractals everywhere we look, which makes me realize that we are part of something so much more grand, something so much more abundant spiritually, physically, and so on and so forth. And the powers that shouldn't be that are trying to keep us out of that empowering mindset know this. And we forget this. But I was hoping today that I could remind us all so that we could come together in abundance and love and take out the powers that shouldn't be and remove the scarcity-based mind control from our lives. Thank you.